to make sure everybody's on the same page. So with that, I'm going to get started. So again, Paul Berry, matter of fact, next month, May, will be 40 years doing this. So I got a little bit of experience. I live in Wake Forest, North Carolina, right outside of Raleigh. So let's go ahead and get started. So what are we going to talk about? Again, like I mentioned, why self-checkout? Lessons learned through that process. We're going to cover that. We're going to cover the best practices. I'm going to cover loss prevention, obviously, and then we're going to go ahead and cover some Q&A with you all. So before I dive in, I just want to put a couple slides up there to make sure we're all on the same page. So we know self-checkout continues to grow. We know 94% of grocers are either doing self-checkout or taking a serious look at it. That leaves about 6% of you that haven't done it yet, or it's not on your roadmap. And really it has to do with, you just don't understand it enough. You haven't been educated enough on what's transpired within the world of self-checkout, because the advantage of self-checkout is you're giving your customers control of the transaction. And that is huge, because by giving your shoppers control of the transaction, it's going to lead to improved customer satisfaction and loyalty, because now you're giving them control. You're giving them a private checkout experience, right? There may be personal hygiene items, things they want to buy, but more importantly is you're giving them a choice of the checkout they wish to pursue. I'll tell you this much. I've seen time and time again, I go into a retailer that has implemented self-checkout, and after they got it fine-tuned, they're following best practices, you're actually going to see a line at the self-checkout lane and no line in front of your point of sale lane, because you're going to quickly learn, right? And if you don't believe me, start asking your customers. There's customers that want to use self-checkout, and they want to use it where there's a good experience, and hopefully you're going to give them that. So by giving them a choice, you're now giving them the option to use self-checkout or a regular man lane. That's called customer service, by giving them that choice versus forcing them to get into a lane where they don't want to get into, because either A, they don't want to talk to a cashier, or B, they don't want to wait, right? But the most important thing, and we've seen this is why self-checkout exploded during COVID, is you get these unpredictable spikes in your front end. You don't have enough cashiers at that particular time of day, so you're grabbing employees from other areas of the store to bail out the front end. So self-checkout smooths out that spike you get on the front end. It reduces your labor cost on the front end and increases your throughput. But, I talk about this more when I talk about why self-checkout, so I'm not going to get into it here. But if you can take that saved labor that you would have on the front end by implementing self-checkout and move that to other areas of your store, you're going to drive huge sales through that, because you're redeploying the labor at point of selection versus just putting them at the front end where self-checkout can handle that. And why else do customers think self-checkout is better? Because they think it's faster, right? Today you have one-to-one queuing in your point of sale lane. Self-checkout, you have 1-to-4 queuing. So the perception is I'm getting in and out of the store faster. That's why I want to use self-checkout. So let's air a little dirty laundry, right? So before I do that, I want to talk about optimization. So today, right, if you say, hey, Paul, where's the trend in self-checkout? The trend I see is those retailers that have implemented self-checkout, and that could be you, right? Maybe you put in 4 lanes or put in 6 lanes. What we're seeing is those retailers trying to embrace more of the self-service options because it's working so well in their stores. So customers that did 4 are adding 2 more, they're going to 6. Customers that did 6 are maybe adding 6 more. They're putting 2 pods of 6 to give them 12. So we're starting to see this trend. Now, we've also seen some retailers do 80% self-checkout. They've seen it as a primary path to get out of the store, right? We knew Walmart, they were doing some experiments with self-checkouts only. We've seen Albertsons, they announced the same thing. They're doing some stores with majority of self-checkouts. Harris Teeter store here in Charlotte, North Carolina, they did 100% self-checkout conversion in the front of the store, right? And then here's what we saw. We saw over the last 12 months, all of these big headlines, Walmart, Costco, and Wegmans, they're ripping out self-checkouts. We know that's not true. That's nowhere close to being true, but you know what? Headlines sell papers. Shrink is skyrocketing through self-checkout. Self-checkout's a failed experiment. You've seen all of these things, right? And maybe if you haven't done it, that's probably why you haven't done it. I'll tell you one thing. What happened was, right, and we're not sitting in the retailer's shoes, but I can assure you that those that went overboard and they did 80% self-checkout or 90% self-checkout, yeah, their shrink probably went up because they didn't have enough shopper assistants manning those lanes, right? So right now, what they're all doing is they're tweaking what they've already done to prevent that shrink and to provide that better customer experience. So really, they went too far. So I think you've seen Target over the last couple of months. They said, you know what, we're going to start limiting 10 items or less at self checkout. Why? They want to do express, because really, when you look at it, self checkout was really designed for the express environment. It wasn't designed for 50 to 80 items in a basket. It was designed for, maybe 20 items or less. So, Target is rewinding on some of their decisions because they went too far. And let's face it, they may have done that because they had no choice. Maybe they didn't have the labor, so they didn't have a choice. So we got to put ourselves in their shoes to think, okay, what did they go through to cause them to make that decision? But now, obviously, they're rewinding on what they did. I find this one interesting is Dollar General, right? They had, I think, one, maybe two self checkouts in every store, and they had shrink. Well, of course they had shrink. They had shrink because they didn't have any shopper assistants helping them in the store, helping the shoppers. So that's kind of why they had the shrink. So let's kind of keep going, and let me get off video here to kind of save on some bandwidth. Give me 1 second. All right. So let's talk about the best of self-checkout best practices. So we know what influences the shopping experience, right, and self-checkout utilization is really three areas. The employees inviting shoppers to use the self-checkouts, right? So that's the shopper assistant, that's the front end person that's floating, that's the front end manager, that's any employee that's passing through the front end, right? You're inviting shoppers to use it. Number two is the experience while they're using it. Is it good? Is it bad? What do they need to do? Managing the queues when queues get too long. So there's a science behind all those three things, and that's what we're going to focus on today. We're going to hit the icing on each one of those things, icing on the cake. Now, the other things make a difference, right? Demographics, store placement. I love when people tell me, well, Paul, my customers are different. They're older crowd. They're not going to use self-checkout. That's baloney. They will use self-checkout, and I can assure you of that. Demographics has no bearing whatsoever on self-checkout utilization if you do it right and they have a good experience. So how do you do a good experience, right? What's needed? You got hardware, you got software, you got operational policies, procedure. Well, is it a good shopping experience? Are they guided through the transaction, through the audios and videos and the lighting of the machine? Did you reduce the complexity, right? Did you minimize the interventions causing them to get stuck? And when they did get stuck, did they get help? Right? Called the 20-second rule. They got to get help quickly. And they're going to rate you, right? Did it feel easy and comfortable? How often did I get stopped? And how fast did I get help? Those are the three things that they're going to judge you on when it comes to their experience at your lanes. What you got to remember is this: just because the Walmart down the street, for example, or the high volume store down the street from you, just because they have self-checkout doesn't mean it's the same experience they're going to get in your store. That store may not be following best practices the way you should be. So I've developed a top 10 list, right? Over the years, I've created this top 10 list. Now, they're not in any particular order. I will tell you, number one on the list is by far the most important, but the other 9 still play a pivotal role in success of self-checkout. So what I'm going to do through this shortened version of our best practice presentation is I'm going to kind of hit the main thing. So let's talk about the shopper assistant. Number one, if you have a podium, I suggest putting that podium off to the side, putting a regular point of sale lane there, and that's only used for exceptions. We call it a vacation station. You don't want your shopper assistant standing there checking their Facebook status, right? You want your shopper assistant working with your shoppers all the time, directing traffic to the lanes. Each shopper assistant should have their own shopper assistant card that they would scan to clear an intervention at the lane and to help the customer. You can audit what they do by having their own card, what they did when they logged in, right? They're there to watch the lighting on the lane, the transaction awareness lights, the customer's body language, see when they're getting frustrated, maybe the audio prompts. But if you want to reduce shrink, the best thing you can do is have them introduce themselves to every shopper that comes in that area. Simple, hi, my name is Paul. Please let me know if you need any assistance. That is the best form of shrink reduction that you can have at the self-checkout lane, because if I've spoken to you and I've looked at you eye to eye, the chances of you stealing at me at self-checkout are probably pretty slim to none, right? Plus, you want to factor in other loss prevention things that we talk about when we do the full-blown best practice presentation. But at a minimum, if the shopper assistant can at least do that, you're ahead of the game. If your shopper assistant is not willing to do that, you got the wrong person, right? They want to greet every shopper. They want to encourage usage, offer to help them, answer questions, remove fear. Remember, your lanes may operate differently than the store down the street, right? Educate the shopper when an error occurred, what happened, how do they prevent it from happening in the future? Again, improve that experience. They got to manage that traffic flow and again, monitor that customer's body language. When they're not slammed and they're not real busy, offer to help the shopper, right? Offer to open the bags for the shopper, type in the PLU for the shopper, show them how it works. I always like to say, especially the elderly crowd, right? They come in and maybe they're intimidated by the technology. They haven't used it before. After the shopper assistant works with that customer 2 or 3 times, that shopper's gonna say, you know what, I got it. Stay over there. I'll handle it myself, right? They've now been trained on how it works. But that shopper assistant should really be there to help the shopper remove the fear, keep the lanes clean. It is a customer-facing device, so you want the screen to stay clean, the scanner scale to stay clean, pin pad, all that good stuff. So that's kind of what the goal is. I am not going to cover these next 2 pages because if you want this presentation, STCR will give it to you. But here's kind of a summary of what I teach on when it comes to the shopper assistant's responsibility for their role within that store, right? This is great for hiring the right shopper assistant. This is what your job is, this page and this page. And if they're not willing to do these things, you got to go find the right person. I always like to say, let your best cashier be the best cashier. Find the associate that is very personable and can multitask. If you can get those 2, you're going to have great success. So let's go to the next one. Management not embracing SCO. I just talked to a retailer 2 days ago, and they tried self-service 4 times. And after talking to them, what they did during those 4 times, it was evident that their leadership was not on the same page. And that's why they failed 4 times. Too bad they didn't talk to me early on during that process. But it's really 3 things: effective planning, committing to best practices, and support from all levels of management, right? And here's the deal. When you're going to do self-checkout, it impacts, obviously, the ownership. It impacts the operations team. It impacts the training team. It impacts, if you have a loss prevention team, it impacts the facilities team. You got to have all of those people on the same page on why we're doing self-checkout. And with that, we really focus on those key items, and that's extremely important. And when we talk about best practices, we dig deep into all those different things. Everything that somebody should know when it comes to self-checkout is every employee needs to know why you're doing self-checkout. That is extremely important. I'll tell you a quick little story. I was in a store in Minnesota. This was a couple of years ago. The team was doing the install, and a shopper walked by and said, "You know what? I'll never use those things. Those are taking jobs." An employee in the store turned to that employee and said, "Sir, did you not see the help wanted sign in the window? Would you like an application? We can't find labor." That diffused it so quick, right? And that was perfect. I couldn't have scripted that in any better, right? So make sure every employee knows. Same thing if you have an employee helping a shopper out to the car, same concept, right? Does that employee know how to answer that shopper's concern if they say, "Hey, are those taking jobs," and all that, right? Make sure management can handle those employee concerns on why you're doing self-checkout. Again, you're going to learn about all those when I talk about why self-checkout next month in the webinar. Make sure you check your store for any red flags. What's a red flag? Anything that you can't check out because it doesn't have a barcode, right? So how do you handle that at self-checkout? You need to solve for some of those things. Make sure all the employees know what their roles are. Make sure all the employees know how to communicate the benefits of self-checkout, right? But here's the most important thing. Here's probably the biggest mistake I see chain grocers having. So if you got more than one store, the biggest mistake I see is you start your first store, right? And if you have multiple stores, listen up. If you start your first store, you do a great job at best practices, right? Everybody's trained, everybody knows what they're doing. Now you're going to do store number 2. You had success in your pilot store. What you do is you take the shopper assistant from store number 2, send them to store number 1. They do shadowing, they learn how to do their job, then they go back to store number 2 and they're ready to go. SCO lanes are installed. That's the only person in store number 2 that knows anything about self-checkout. And then you fail miserably because none of the employees understand why you did it. They can't answer customer concerns. They can't even answer their own concern because now they think their job is threatened because you did self-checkout. So you've got to create some training content. And when I do normal best practice training, I give you that training content to incorporate into your standard training material. You want to make sure employees in that second, third, and fourth, fifth store understand the same thing that store one understood, so they can be successful at self-checkout. Hopefully that resonates with you guys on the phone. All right. So let's keep going through. We're going to cover 3, 4, 5, 8, 9, and 10. So what really affects the utilization, right? So location, right? You got to make sure their lanes are located in the right spot. I know it's very simple to take the lanes and shove them on the end, right? Especially if you have a very wide front end. That's what Walmart does. That's what Target does. That's great in certain circumstances, but you know what? That's not the best location. The best location is in the center of the front end. When I talk about queue management, you'll understand that here in the next couple charts. You want to make sure that people can see them as they come into the front end when they're done shopping. You want them away from exit doors. You want to eliminate express lanes unless it's at the service counter, because express lanes compete with self-checkout, right? You want to make sure there's no HVAC vents blowing down onto them. You want to use low merchandise racks to surround those self-checkouts in a courtyard environment where they're facing each other. You want one line going in, not two. And you never want to share an electrical outlet with other things with self-checkout, like a cooler or things like that. So we'll work with you on the placement and where they should go. But again, like I said, best case is in the center. If you have to put them on the end, put them on the end where the shopper enters the front end when they're done shopping, not when they're ready to walk out the door. But we can put them on a grid, show you what that would look like with some low merchandise racks so people can see behind them. So why do I say put them in the center? So queue management, remember, it's about a quarter of the utilization of self-checkout, right? People using it. So when you start to open up POS lanes, you want to open them up next to self-checkout, not away from self-checkout. You never want a closed lane next to self-checkout. And you never want too many lanes open, right, where cashiers are twiddling their thumbs and shoppers are going to them versus going to your self-checkout, right? What influences people to use self-checkout? They don't want to wait in line. So you need lines to encourage people to use self-checkout that would normally not use them. So if you look at my scenario, the first thing you want to do is open lane 3, then lane 4, then lane 2, then lane 5. So kind of tier outward from the middle. That way, as lines are forming, the shopper assistant will do their job and go invite shoppers to use self-checkout, and you start to bust down those lines. I can tell you, it's probably the number one mistake retailers make is they open lanes away from self-checkout, and then they have too many lanes open with self-checkout open. Then they wonder why shoppers aren't using their self-checkouts because the cashier's waving them over, right? Here's a quick layout. This is a store, McKeever's Market in Kansas City. Great layout in the center, in a courtyard environment, right in front of customer service. This was an install. This is a picture right after the install. What's missing from this picture is one line going in, using merchandise racks, low merchandise racks to form that one line going in. Also, what's missing from the picture is merchandise racks around the self-checkout lanes. Other from that, it's a perfect layout. I love this layout. Not reviewing the BOSS reports and speaking to the shopper assistant to make continuous improvements. What's the BOSS? The BOSS is the back office system server. It can either sit in the store or at your headquarter location talking to all the stores. It's really your choice. But the net of it is the BOSS is really there. That's kind of your heartbeat of the self-checkouts. The self-checkouts will communicate to the BOSS when they're online. It's got all your reporting information. It holds your weight database of what the weights of the products are. It's where you would configure your quick item lookup for your flip charts. It's where you're going to create your shopper assistant profile information. It's got your lane configuration. But the most important thing I think about the BOSS is the reporting. The reporting is what's going to tell you the health of those lanes. How are they operating? When are they busy? When are they not? What are the not on files, right? What are the average basket sizes? What voids are being done? What cashbacks are being done? You name it. This is all the intelligence of your SCOs are going to be fed into the BOSS reporting database. I always like to say, if you're doing best practices, you're going to get at least 35% of your transactions, not revenue, transactions, going through the self-checkout lanes. If you're getting under 35%, you have a problem. And the way you're going to figure out that problem is digging into these BOSS reports to see, am I getting too many interventions on a certain lane, destroying the customer experience, right? And this is where you're going to ID problems with the lane, with the packaging, it won't scan, what's causing the intervention, da 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 da. That's what's going to feed you that information. So if you're not looking at the BOSS reports, you're going to crash and burn. That's just the moral of the story when it comes to self-checkout. Red flags, I hit on that a little earlier in the presentation. So again, red flags are things that the shopper that has no cashier training, right? The shopper can't do with the self-checkout. So, they can't scan a barcode. There is no barcode. There's two barcodes. There's two barcodes at different prices, right? All those things. So you got to go through your store one time and make sure you clean up the item file and make sure that things aren't on file, right? They're not missing. Or, if you're doing prepackaged goods, how are those going to be handled at the self-checkout? But again, this is something that STCR will go through with you line by line as you move forward. Not utilizing lane security. This is a huge one. So they take you for a step back, and this really goes back to, when I talk about why self-checkout. So the way the lane security works, just to refresh your memory, no, you don't have to go through the store and scan every item to get the weight. As you install self-checkout and people start to use it, shoppers begin to use it, it starts to build its weight database. So it starts to learn what every product weighs, and it has a range, right? So after 10 good scans of a product, it's going to lock that product UPC into the database. So it's going to know that when they come in with this UPC, it needs to weigh within this range. And if it doesn't, it's going to have a weight intervention. So it'll learn that. And it's smart enough to know that some products have multiple weights. Before they used to add 10%, now with shrinkflation, they reduce 10% of the packaging, keep the same UPC. So our weight database is smart enough to have multiple weights for a product. It also goes in and it cleans itself up every week. It goes through some algorithms in the background. You don't even know it, and it tightens up the tolerances on those different weight ranges for each of the product to make sure it's fine-tuned. But we also overlay the shopper's behavior with the weight of the product. And what does that mean? These are patented algorithms that we've developed. And so let's say the shopper's there scanning items, everything's going great, no weight security errors, everything's perfect, and they put their umbrella in the bagging area. The first thing the self-checkout lane is going to do is please remove unscanned item from bagging area. Well, they ignore it. They keep on going. And it keeps adding items to the cart, no problem. As long as they remove that umbrella prior to hitting tender, it's not going to cause an error. It's not going to stop the lane, right? They're going to be able to tender out, pay, and be on their way. So we kind of let the shopper fix their own errors, right? Every single lane in your chain contributes to that weight database, and it's all part of the same analysis. You can configure how stringent you want that database to be or not as far as causing interventions. And you can also limit how many times a POE number could be entered during a transaction. Maybe bananas, they only do it one time, 4011, right? Not let them do it twice. Your quick item lookup, this is key, right? So make sure that you work with STCR to have your flip charts very organized on the screen. It's easy to find your items. If you have organics, make sure you put those organics right next to the non-organic products so they see both buttons right together. Some people like to put the word organic on it. We've had some retailers to help identify organics. They create a little organic logo they actually put on the items themselves, and they put that same logo on the button, right? So now the shopper can correlate organics with the button and the sticker on the actual produce item. So there's a lot of different ways you can handle organics at the self-checkout. I'm going to talk about Produce Rec here in a little while. That'll explain it more. But obviously, you want to put organics next to the normal item. You want an organics category tab as well. So it's, you give them 3 different ways to find organics. That way, you're not having shrinkage there. Type 2 barcodes. So again, we know what those are. So variable weight items. Normally, the cashier is just going to scan the barcode. It knows what the weight is. You don't got to worry about it. Self-checkout normally is the same way, right? You scan the barcode. It knows what the cost of that item is because it's embedded into the barcode. We go one step further with our software on the self-checkout. And if you have the scale file loaded or you have the connection to the point of sale database, we will actually go and find out what the cost is per pound for that, let's say, steak. We're going to compare it to what's on the scanner scale weight. along with the cost per pound to see if it matches. And if it doesn't, we're going to cause an intervention. So we go one step further on some of the type 2 barcodes and not just take the barcode price at face value. So make sure those things are turned on. So let's dive into loss prevention. So we have a new platform of products that fall under our Alera platform. Alera comes from Accelerate. So we have several new products that fall under that category. And one of them is our Alera Security Suite, which is a set of loss prevention solutions. So here's some of the things we're doing, some of the things we've released, some of the things we're working on. So one of them is produce recognition. I'm going to show you that. Item identification, we'll talk about that. We're working on bottom of the basket and also biometric age verification. And the way we're doing that is we're building it out. So if you look at our latest model, System 7, right, we'll kind of explode the chart a little bit. Loss prevention for produce recognition, it's a camera that points down onto the scanner scale. I'm going to show you more about that. We have an overhead camera that looks for customer behavior, customer movement over the scanner scale. We'll talk about that. We're going to integrate those two cameras together to talk with one another. We're on the roadmap is bottom of the basket. So we're going to identify if something is below the basket and stop the lane and make sure the shopper adds it to their cart. Another piece that's part of the roadmap is a camera pointing into the security scale area. And our goal is to have many of these cameras talk with one another, right? And then the personal video monitor that's available today. This is a monitor that sits on top of this is a camera that sits on top of the monitor that will show the shopper's face while they're shopping. So they kind of feel a little bit intimidated, like they're being watched. So that's also an option. But the first one I want to talk about really is produce recognition. So what are we trying to solve for? Remember I mentioned earlier, what happens if you have an item that doesn't have a barcode, right? It may or may not have a PLU, who knows? So a lot of shoppers won't use self-service devices because they think they're going to get stuck because they have produce, right? That's one issue that we've seen. The other one is shrink. How do we know that they're not trying to steal from you at self-checkout? How do we know they're not putting a T-bone down in the scanner scale and they're typing in 4011, right? Try to get it for a banana price. So those are two things that we're trying to solve for with this solution, which is available today. So what's the advantage of it, right? By having produce recognition, you're going to increase adoption to using self-checkout. You're going to shorten the transaction time because now computer technology, right? AI, advanced, analytics and things like that are going to help identify the produce, right? And you're going to minimize shrink because now we're going to pick what the correct item is, not the shopper, and we're going to double check them, right? So you're going to reduce those errors. So how do we do it? We have computer vision, right? And AI technology in the camera itself. So all of the brains are actually in the camera. No, you're not buying separate servers and this big database and all that stuff. No, all of the technology is based in the camera. It is a cloud-based solution. So it's constantly being updated. And it's really there to optimize the actual transaction. So the way it works is this. It's a little camera that sits on the side of the display and points down onto the scanner scale. So when you place a produce item on the scanner scale, the first thing it's going to do is it's going to trigger the computer vision to look at that item. The AI technology is going to try to examine the item to figure out what it is. Next step is to have the software, our check software, to display a limited list of items that look like that item. So if it's round and red, we're going to map it to produce that is round and red. And that's the only thing we're going to show on the screen. We're going to let the shopper select which one they say is the correct one, and then they're done. So through that whole process, we are gathering everything the shopper did, right? What we put on the screen, what they selected, we're going to send it up to the cloud. And we're consolidating all that information from all of our Toshiba customers using this solution. And then 4 times a year, we're coming out with a new model that we download into the camera. And that's going to improve the selection criteria. It's going to improve which items are going to select on the screen. It's going to add missing produce items. Maybe you have produce in your store that's not part of the standard database. It's going to add those missing ones. So we're constantly updating the technology as the system gets smarter and smarter the more that it's used. So it's really a living, breathing type of solution. It's not just a stagnant item. So I'm going to show you a video so I can take a breath. And this video is really going to do a much better job of showing you how this thing works versus me telling it to you. So what you're looking at on the screen right now is the actual self-checkout screen is on the left. The camera is right here on the left-hand side of the display, and this is what it's seeing. It's actually taking a picture of what's going on to that scanner scale, and it's sending it. It's doing the modeling in the actual camera. When it's done, it's sending all the telemetry data up to the cloud after they're done with the transaction. So let me let it play.
Today we're going to show you the Toshiba produce recognition solution. For the demo, we're running a System 7 unit that's running our check software along with a Toshiba Edge camera that's actually doing the computer vision algorithms on the camera itself. Let's get started. In order to enter produce using self-checkout, again, you indicate that you're entering produce. You put your item on the scale. The system recognizes the item. For items that have both organic and non-organic items, both are shown for the shopper to choose. Here, we'll select our bananas, add them to the cart. The solution also works with bags. So here we have an avocado put in a bag. Select produce recognition. The item gets recognized. We add it to our cart. We also recognize items that are in a reusable bag. So here we have oranges, put them on the scale, request the system to identify them, and it does identify the items. So the other feature of the solution is allowing the shopper to correct their own mistakes that they could have inadvertently made while shopping. So here, we'll put garlic on the scale, allow the system to identify it. Let's assume the shopper says they don't want to use that item, they want to key the PLU in themselves. They inadvertently enter the wrong item number. So what the system will do will show them exactly what the camera observes, the item they entered, and what the system selects as the actual item on the scale. Here, the shopper can easily correct their mistake and enter the correct item. Next, loss prevention in terms of customers that are not making accidental mistakes. In this example, they're trying to purchase a steak for a banana. They put the steak on the scale. Enter the produce. The system does not recognize the item, so the shopper can key in their own item number. So here we're keying in bananas. The system shows what was actually on the scale, the item that the shopper entered, so they know that they've been caught. They can continue down this path and say they want to select the bananas anyway. Once they put the item in the bag, the shopper assistant is called over to be able to address the situation. Once they scan their shopper assistant card, we show the item image of the steak. We show that the shopper entered the banana, so the shopper assistant can void the item at this point in time to continue the transaction. That's Toshiba's produce recognition solution.
All right, so as you saw from that video, it's not only produce recognition, but it's also loss prevention, preventing shrink. So that same exact solution. So if you're a Toshiba ACE point of sale customer, so if you're running ACE and not Lock SMS, if you're running ACE and you have the Data Logic 9800i scanner scale, this exact same solution will work at your ACE lane that I just showed you, the produce rack. So it uses the top-down imaging stock with our edge camera inside of it, pointing down onto the scanner scale with the exact same software. So you get to take advantage of that. If you're running Lock, it is on the roadmap, but it's probably not going to happen until very, very late in the year. There's some files that we have to produce for other ISVs to take advantage of this solution. So more to come on that one. But what's the savings at the front end lane? Really, the savings is, if you look on the left-hand side of the chart, it takes a little bit of time to figure out what the PLU item is. So maybe from memory, 6 seconds. If they get to scan it, 2.9, obviously. Asking the cashier next door is about 12 seconds versus 3.5 seconds on the right-hand side by letting the cashier just hit produce, look up, and it does it for them, give them the short list to pick from. All right, so let's switch gears to the next Alera Security Suite solution, which we call loss prevention. Again, it's part of the whole package, right? It's a separate component from Produce Rec. This is a camera that sits above above the system, and it's mounted to the transaction awareness light, and it points down. So here's another view of it. It actually points down onto the scanner scale. So what this is trying to catch is shoppers' movement from left to right or right to left. And are they doing a ghost scan? So a ghost scan basically means they're pretending to scan the item because they want to rip you off, right? They're covering the barcode, they're stacking products, whatever it may be. So they're pretending to scan the item and put it into the bagging area, right? So our goal, and it could be intentional, it could be a mistake, really don't know. But our goal is when we catch that, we're going to stop the machine. We're going to have the shopper acknowledge what they did. They're going to see a video on the screen of what we've seen happen and give them the opportunity to correct their error. So, i.e., take it out of the bagging area and actually scan the product. So this video I'm going to show you right here is during our proof of concept. And when I look at this video, it's hard to tell based on the viewing angle, but I think this was an honest mistake, the way the shopper is actually managing the situation. I don't think it was intentional, but you can be your own judge. So let's play this along. So the shopper's coming, scans the item, and the lane doesn't like what she did, right? So it's going to stop. And she's like, okay, what happened, right? And it's showing the video on the screen right now, what she did. And so now she has the option to go and correct it before the shopper assistant comes over. So I think that was an intentional, not intentional, I think it was unintentional error that the shopper made. So we see this happen all the time. So thank God the wait security caught it, but so did the camera, right? So, that's kind of what we're trying to catch. So I'm going to show you some other videos. Let me go to this next one here. Now this one I enjoy. So this one, I think you'll agree with me that this is a intentional ghost scan, the way the shopper's looking around. Now, again, this is proof of concept. Look at the green circle and it'll say misscan. So we caught this during the proof of concept phase. Now this solution's available today, don't worry about that, but this was caught during the proof of concept phase. So if I come over here and start playing it, shopper grabs an item, looks around, nobody's looking, pretend to scan it, throw it in the bagging area, and now you're going to see misscan up there. So that's an intentional ghost scan where the shopper actually meant to do that. Now, that use case is available today. So again, the scan zone is over the scanner scale only. The next release of the software, which are future use cases that we're working on for later this year, is we're going to look in front of the self-checkout. We're going to look in the bagging in the basket area. So our goal with these next use cases are catching it going from the basket to the bagging area, not even going to the scanner. So watch this video on the left. She comes by, she takes a couple items right from the basket, puts them right into the bagging area, and you're going to see a misscan area show up in that green area, right? So she intentionally did that as we've seen from the video. So let's look at the one on the right, same situation. The one on the right, I love the best. So again, here's a hat. You know what? I'm just going to put it on my head instead, and you're going to see a misscan up in that green circle. So these are some of the things that we're working on in the lab. So again, these two use cases, again, looking at the basket area in front of the SCO lane is what we're going to capture next. And we're taking them based on which ones are done most likely. So we already talked about a couple of these things. So again, personal video monitor, this is where you can buy the software solution that runs with the self-checkout that will show the shopper's face. A more inexpensive solution would be just mounting an integrated camera with a monitor on the transaction awareness light, showing the shopper's face on the screen. Whether you actually record that content or not is really your choice. These are just some other things that you can do to prevent shrink. Again, we dig deep into these things when we cover best practices in full detail, but these are just some of the other things that you can do to help prevent shrink in your store. Again, you only want one entrance, one exit point into the self-checkouts. Use existing cameras, but you need something watching the self-checkout area if you want to do it right. Just some, and this is my last chart really, just some advice from retailers that have done self-checkout, right? To those of you that are getting ready to do it or have already done it, right? You must follow best practices. Your success really is dependent on the shopper assistant. Interventions, people, don't like to be caught. So you want to talk to them as much as possible, right? Encourage shoppers to use it. Don't force them to use it. And adjust labor hours, after things settle down a little bit. And again, the best form of of theft deterrent is really having the shopper assistant talking to those shoppers, right? That's key there. And make sure you got buy-in at all levels of management. That's key. And again, don't base your whole business case on labor savings, right? If you can redeploy the labor, you're going to drive higher customer sat, you're going to drive higher basket sizes. We've seen that time and time again. But we talk more about that when we talk about why self-checkout. So, Angel, with that, I am going to turn it back over to you for questions.
So we had a few questions. The first one is, what are the requirements needed to set up produce recognition, and what should my next steps be to implement it at my store?
Okay, so I'll answer that two ways. If you don't have self-checkout in that store, I would recommend ordering your self-checkouts with the produce rec camera installed at the factory, right? If you already have self-checkout in your store, you need to work with STCR, and they're going to ask you a couple questions. Basically, they should know the configuration of your lane. They'll know exactly. There's really one part that you need to order, and that's the camera, along with the new end cap where the camera is going to sit. That's really the only hardware you need to order for the SCO lane. So you order that, Toshiba will install it, and then you would work with STCR to install the software. We have a customer success team that works with you as part of that onboarding process. So they're going to help configure the software. They'll work with you on your quick item lookup file, your PLU file, and we'll match organic to non-organics, and we'll make sure it's tweaked for your store. They'll put it in the store. It'll go in silent mode, so it'll run in the background without anybody knowing, and it'll watch what the customer's selecting. We're going to show you reports on the success of that pilot, right? When it was learning in the background what the customers were selecting, and then we turn it on live, and then now the customer will be able to select, look up produce, and you're on your way. So it's kind of a multi-step process, but we kind of hold your hand through that implementation of the produce rec piece.
Thank you.
Right. Yep.
Our next question is, if I think self-checkout is a great idea for my operation, but I need to convince my ownership that it's the right move, how would you approach that?
My suggestion is this: schedule some time with me and your ownership, right? I always like to say, give me an hour of the leadership's time and I'll convince them that self-checkout is for them. I never, sign up for the big bang approach. I never say, you know what, if you got 20 stores, 30 stores, 5 stores, go at it full bore ahead, right? No, my suggestion is going to be, let's do it right and successful in one store. If you're happy with your results, then we proceed forward. If you're not happy with your results, then we figure out why, what's wrong. But yeah, I see it all the time, and I'll tell you, right? I do this all day long, coast to coast. Any retailer today, right, ownership, management, that doesn't believe self-checkout is for them, they have not spoken to their shoppers, because it may not be for them, but I can assure you, you have shoppers coming into your store wish you had self-checkout, and you're not providing them that choice. Again, nobody's saying go 100% self-checkouts. You want to offer a choice, but I'll tell you, your shoppers will embrace it. If not, they're going to embrace it down the street from you. But yeah, give me an hour of your time, set it up with STCR, and I'll either come on site and talk to them, or we can do it via webinar and go that way.
Our next question is, can the self-checkouts handle unique tears for items? For example, a customer bringing their own mason jar or container to the store to fill with store product.
Yeah, no, that gets a little tricky. Can it handle multiple tears? Yes, you can have multiple tears based on the product, right? And then you can give them a selection at the screen on what container they're using. When they bring in their own container, that gets a little tricky. I'm not going to say it can't be done, but it's not going to work the first time. So we need to work with you and figure out what that is. It may require some training on behalf of the customer. But there's always a way around it, but it's something that we would definitely have to implement in the lab and make sure that it's working based on the needs of that particular store and that clientele.
The next question is, do you have any examples of grocers, which grocers are doing the best job with self-checkouts in the marketplace today?
Yeah, Wegmans does a fantastic job. Now, again, that's based on the store, right? So what I mean by that is you could have a chain and one or two of the stores may not be following best practices. And they're probably not a good example to use. So I always say you got to go in there and look. But Wegmans does a real good job of it. Several retailers do. You know, McKeever's does a great job of it. Heinen's in Cleveland, Ohio, for example, they do a great job of it. So there's certain retailers that I work with do a really good job. You know, what I always do that to help the customer out is, you know, let's say you have self-checkout today. I'm actually going to go do this next week for a customer in Madison, Wisconsin. I'm going to go visit 3 other stores and they have self-checkout. Our self-checkouts in all 3 stores. And I'm going to spend 30 minutes in each store taking notes, talking to the shopper assistant, watching the operation, see how they're doing. And then the next day I'm going in to meet with the leadership team. I'm going to review in detail 90 minutes of best practices with them. Again, right? It's been years since they've had it. And I'm also going to review my findings for those 3 stores and report back to them, kind of a report card. How are they doing? What can they do to improve? It's got to be continuous improvement with self-checkout. It's not an autopilot thing. You install it and there it goes. You got to have somebody that takes ownership and you know, pride in that solution to make sure that the experience is good. So every retailer is a little different. Those, you know, I think Wegman does a really good job taking pride in what they do. I have other retailers that don't even assign their shopper assistant. I have one retailer in North Carolina. It's a big chain. If I told you who they were, you'd know it, but they canceled their whole self-checkout project because of shrink. And I'm like, well, why do you have shrink? Well, I went to the store. I did my little 30-minute flyover and found out, they don't have a shopper assistant assigned to the self-checkouts. They had the self-checkouts right in front of the exit door, and they turned off all weight-based security, and they have no audio video cameras anywhere in the self-checkout area. So they have 4 strikes against them, and then they wonder why that they had shrink and they failed, right? It's black and white on why they failed, but they're not willing to change. So guess what? They don't get to provide their customers with self-checkout. And this is a customer that refused to do self-checkout for years because they were different until their customers started asking them for it. Then they did it, but they did it wrong. So again, perfect case study on what not to do when it comes to the self-checkout. So don't make those mistakes.
Our next question is, how many self-checkouts do you recommend for like a small/medium-sized store?
Yeah, so good question. Never put less than 4, right? The reason why is if you put less than 4, you will never assign a shopper assistant to those lanes. You'll think you're smarter than the other guy and you're going to manage them from the customer service counter. You're going to manage them from the lane next door and you're going to fail. So never do less than 4, never do more than 50% of lanes. So again, my suggestion is work with STCR. We'll take measurements in the front end. We'll see how many regular lanes you have, how much space you have, how many express lanes you have, where the exit door is, where the customer service counter is, and we'll plop on a grid what your front end would look like with X number of self-checkout lanes, right? We also have to decide what type of self-checkout lanes. Do you want small ones because you have very limited space? Do you want an average size one which handles larger basket sizes? You know, there's some science to it, and we'll work with you to make sure, you know, it's a perfect fit for you. But yeah, never less than 4, and never more than 50% of your lanes should be self-checkout.
So Paul, I think that was our last question. Thank you so
Sure.
much for joining us.
That was a good question.
Today.
I never had that question before, so that was a good question.
Really?
Yeah, usually what happens is they'll do less than 4, then they wonder why they failed. And it's because they won't assign a shopper assistant because of the labor situation. So yeah, good question. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for your time. Like I said, get with Angel and the team. And if you want a copy of this presentation, great. If you don't have self-checkout, please sign up for the webinar next month, where I'll be digging deep as far as why self-checkout goes. And we'll kind of go from there. Thank you, Angel.
You're welcome. And you guys can always email us at sales@stcr.com. Next month, we'll have our next installment of the self-checkout monthly master series. That is at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time, May 2nd. As well, later this month, we'll be hosting our wildly popular Lunch and Learn series on Thursday, April 25th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. This session will focus on frequent shopper and loyalty. Again, thank you guys for joining us and have a great day.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.